Welcome back to the Logosians Podcast. Today we're starting a series that we're calling Extinguishing Doubt. Here we're going to discuss a field of study known as Christian Apologetics, where we're going to handle challenges to the Christian worldview and the Christian faith, and really talk about the why questions. The first question we should ask is what is apologetics? Apologetics doesn't mean that we're apologizing for being Christians. It doesn't mean that we're sorry for being Christians. It actually comes from the Greek word apologia, which just means to give a defense, as in making your case in a court of law. So part of the discussion today is going to be over our personal experiences with apologetics, the benefits of apologetics for the Christian life, and why it's important for us to study, basically, as Christians. So today we have Derek.
Hello.
Josh, and Dylan.
Hi, everybody.
Great group of guys. So let's get started. So we all actually engage in apologetics. We're all apologists. It's just whether or not we're good ones or not. But we all defend a certain position. So even if I'm like a defender of Michael Jordan as the greatest basketball player of all time, and then I start giving you or making a defense for why he's the greatest of all time, because he is, then
Correct.
I'm actually engaged in apologetics. Right? Apologetics or defending of Michael Jordan, right? So
apologetics doesn't just mean Christian apologetics. It's just the defense of whatever you're talking about.
right, yeah. So that's why you have Muslim apologist or Catholic apologist or all the way through. Basically, theology proper is giving you the what you believe. And apologetics, Christian apologetics, is just giving you the why you believe it. So certain doctrines, and then we're just trying to defend those doctrines and stuff. So there's actually a really rich history with Christian apologetics if you go back to the early church and stuff. But anyway, that's what this session is going to be discussing for all of us. So for you guys. We all have different backgrounds and everything, and some of us have engaged in apologetics before. But what's some of y'all's experience? What's your experience has been with Christian apologetics?
Well, mine, you introduced me to apologetics whenever I think you handed me the book Tactics by
Greg Koukl.
Koukl, yeah, that's right. And that's how I kind of started down my path to apologetics. And then I started working with Dylan, and then me and Dylan would talk about it every now and then. So.
Are you sure it's not Kunkel?
Well, there's Brett Koukl, but there's Greg Koukl.
No, I think it's Brett Koukl and Greg Kunkel.
No.
Okay.
That's incorrect.
Agree to disagree.
Agree to disagree. When in Rome.
These are alternative facts.
But yeah. You handed me the book Tactics. I remember, because I remember reading it, and it was the first time I'd heard about apologetics, and I didn't understand it. Like, why haven't we been taught this in church?
Right.
I was 23, 24 whenever he handed it to me, and I was kind of confused at how I hadn't heard about apologetics as a topic up until that point.
Yeah.
Well, for me, apologetics it became like a big part of my walk with Christ fairly early because, like we've discussed before, I actually came to know Christ in college. And shortly after that, while I was in classes where we were talking about atheistic and foreign philosophies and religious worldviews. I took a lot of religious studies courses, and I learned about all these different religious traditions all over the world. So basically my coming to faith coincided with the season in life where I most needed the ability to defend it. Not long after that, I was exposed to a lot of guys Will Pratney, N.T. Wright, Lee Strobel, and I really just started dissecting their works, and then later on guys like William Lane Craig. And then I got I started watching a lot of videos. I loved watching the live debates that some of these people were having. Professor John Lennox became another one of my heroes, and just watching these guys do what they do, both on stage and on the page. it just, I never realized before how much of a connection I had to that form of ministry, and just how naturally predisposed I was to it. So apologetics is just something that from the very beginning I've been very interested in, and have since enjoyed a lot. And it's just part of, it's just one of those ways in which I connect with the Lord. So.
Nice.
So yeah, similar to Josh, apologetics was something that showed up when I really needed it, because I went through, I mean, as I've said on a previous episode, I went through a season of doubt and questioning, and I don't know, I mean, it's hard to remember the exact timeline. I don't know that I ever would have affirmed the title of atheist at that time.
Yeah.
But in all but name, I was, and everything was dry, just kind of going through life thinking about completely secular things. And as I said, on the other episode when we talked about this, I found my way back first, through reading Tolkien and Lewis, and Lewis getting into his apologetics and working my way from that to Aquinas, and then to William Lane Craig, which, about around that time, like, we knew each other pretty well. And you really recommended him highly. And I know that I went through his entire, Reasonable Faith podcast feed for 3 years in a week.
Nice.
And I was, drawing lines on the board, acting crazy.
Yeah.
And after that, that was the first time that I'd ever decided to read the Bible from start to finish. Because I just felt so engaged, and I'm here now. I am really a Christian and not just playing a game.
Yeah.
Where who's a good person because I go to church or whatever. I positively believe this.
That's awesome.
And I went through the Bible in 21 days, and I've never looked back.
Man, that's crazy.
That's amazing. So yeah, so you're a result of apologetics in a lot of ways.
Yes, and even though I grew up in church, we didn't talk about this. And like Derek said, why? Why didn't we?
Yeah.
It would have helped, because I went through all these classes that were talking about philosophy, atheism, science, the whole gamut of the things that make people question. And because I stumbled through into this wide world of great Christian thinkers and the long tradition, here I am.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that, First Peter, he talks about always be prepared to give a hope for the reason that lies within you.
Right.
Which is, I believe, actually where we get the word apologetics from, right? That word for reason is actually apologia.
So the word defense.
Yeah. So 1 Peter 3:15. Yeah. So 1 Peter 3:15 in there. Apologia is actually in that verse.
Yeah. So it's funny that you have something so blatantly in Scripture like that, amongst other scriptures like it, that instruct us as Christians to do exactly what we have not been doing by and large for a long, long time.
Yeah. No. And I think that. I think that this is another one of those things that the church hasn't done a good job with, for a couple of different reasons, right? There's a thought there that the apologetics, by doing apologetics and doing arguments and stuff, that they feel like it's stale, or like you're doing the work of the Holy Spirit, or that, for whatever other reason, they're just not interested in doing those types of things. But I think part of the reason that, another reason why the church necessarily doesn't always embrace apologetics is because I think that sometimes we feel like we're still in a Billy Graham America culture, to where people are still looking at the Bible as if it is God's word and that it's some sort of authority. But that's just not the culture that we live in anymore. And so anyway, but one of the, there's really three ways that apologetics can really help, I guess there's benefits to it, three benefits to it. One is that it can help shape culture. The other thing is that it can help strengthen believers. And then it can also help us in evangelism and reaching unbelievers. And so what, I guess throughout history and everything, Christianity itself has shaped culture, shaped history, whether it's schools, like universities, medicine, that type of stuff, whatever. But maybe what are some ways, or maybe you guys can think of, like, what are some ways that Christianity has like shaped the world or shaped culture and stuff throughout history?
Well, I mean, Judeo-Christian values and ethic are essentially like the bedrock of Western civilization. I mean, that is, what's the old saying? It's like the soul of the West is Jerusalem, but the mind is of Athens. Isn't that kind of how the old saying goes? So like the Enlightenment and everything that happens in Greece and all that met with Judeo-Christian values that obviously are born in Jerusalem. Are at the bedrock of everything about our society, from the way in which we view the sovereignty of the individual, which impacts our justice systems and the laws that they're built on, and a lot of different things that we could talk about.
Yeah, to that point, we have discussed Tom Holland's Dominion, not the actor, obviously.
Right,
Different guy.
not Spider-Man, but
and I mean, his
historian.
thesis of the book is that Western civilization is entirely built on Christianity. I guess he wouldn't say entirely, but that is the firm foundation of it. And everything that we do now, and all of our attitudes about the poor and whatever else, comes from Christianity, not really from ancient Rome or Greece, which did not have a very good human rights track record, and amongst other things. And so, like, it's his opinion, and I think it's pretty clear, if you actually know enough about history, that is the cornerstone of culture in America. And even, if you get into non-Christian worldviews, critical race theory or whatever else, they're still in some way imitating Christianity, Marxism or whatever. They have their
they're
own,
trying to pull from something.
Yeah, they have their own eschatology and so on. And it's basically just Christianity without God.
Yeah, trying to get to that. And the interesting thing about like Tom Holland's not a Christian. He's an atheist, I think. Or would he consider himself an agnostic? Do you remember?
I heard this just a couple of days ago. I haven't checked. He's actually converted.
Really?
Yeah. For the people who don't know, who is Tom Holland?
So Tom Holland is basically a world-class historian. He wrote Dominion, which is really focused on Christianity. It's like 600 or some odd pages of information. And basically that we the ethics and things that we have today really are distinctly Christian, and they weren't brought in from like he said, Rome or Greece or some of these other philosophers and thinkers. And like basically everything about himself, like about the way he lives his life and the rights and wrongs and justice system, all that stuff, whatever. He said everything about me is Christian, because that's the culture, that's what we're living in, that's the environment that we're in, is a Western Christian culture. He also wrote like the Rubicon and another work that received some awards too for
another
history.
book. He's probably written several others. Yeah, like I said, I haven't checked on it, but I did hear someone say that on some video the other day.
No,
He's actually converted.
No, that'd be amazing. I mean,
Which it echoes in a way of C.S. Lewis. He's saying that like everything about him basically is Christian, and in Surprised by Joy, when Lewis is talking about his conversion, he gets to a point where he's talking about how every good writer that he trusts throughout history is Christian, and he thinks that they're all really good except for the Christianity part. And he says at one point that G.K. Chesterton he thinks is the most reasonable man in the world except for the Christianity. And then after that, when it came to it, although he wouldn't have said it out loud because of how absurd it would sound, Christianity was actually pretty reasonable except for the Christianity. And it's this whole like idea of like this entire worldview, except for like the weird supernatural parts that are the last thing that were to fall for him to embrace.
Yeah, I think, and it's so interesting, because you have guys like C.S. Lewis, T.S. Eliot ends up becoming a Christian, right? So if Tom Holland was, that does seem to be down that same type of path as some of those guys, and that would be really, it'd be fantastic. It'd be really interesting stuff, whatever if that's the case. So, but yeah, so along those lines, as far as like Lewis's conversion, so some people say that like that apologetics, basically you can't argue someone into the kingdom, and I would agree with that to an extent and stuff, but there are several folks, and Lee Strobel's even talked about this before, that there are several people, like he lost count of like how many people have actually seen Christianity basically reasonable and justifiable and everything, and those are what moved them to accepting Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. And so Lewis being one of those guys too, on his conversion. But
so that's something that I felt like at one point when I had just come to the faith, I didn't realize how big of an issue that was. I think I was on such of a emotional and spiritual high in regards to the faith, that I underestimated the intellectual barriers that some people had, and I actually like downplayed them, which I think part of that is just kind of the religious tradition we get in the Bible Belt, right? Because you actually have there's a generation of believers who reject apologetics, I think mostly out of ignorance, because they believe that it's somehow a substitute for faith. Like if you're being too rational about this, you got to just believe.
Right.
You just got to just believe, right?
Fideists.
Right, that kind of thing.
Faith.
So, and there was a twinge of that in me until being a campus minister for a little bit. I legitimately got to sit down with students, with young men who had very genuine intellectual barriers that were up, that, number one, I was surprised at how easy a lot of them were to actually get over, and it grieved me because I'm like, how has this not been torn down already? So I feel like from those moments on, and I'm specifically thinking of one student I never forget, Michael and myself had been talking to him, and then he said that I would love to come to Jesus, I would love to, but I just have so many questions that have to be answered that just prevent me from it. And Michael, in all of his faith, just said to the guy, he says, I want you to tonight go home, I want you to think of every question you have, every one, and tomorrow we're going to we're going to meet up at the same time, and we're going to tear down every one. And he showed up the next day, notebook in hand, had like 4 pages filled out, and he looked down at him, and like his hands were just shaking. Also, he just dropped the book and started crying. So like at the end of the day, and just gave his life to Jesus. So there are people who are like that, where it's like a lot of it's superficial, but then there are other people that you come across who legitimately, it's like, this question needs to be answered, and if not, I just can't get past this. And a lot of them, unfortunately, though, are ones that are old, like hundreds of years old, like the problem of evil, which is the same thing. If God is so good and so powerful, how can these bad things happen? Right. Which has been addressed hundreds of times.
All the way back to Augustine.
Going back to
probably
Augustine,
earlier than that.
But we have to, in every generation.
I mean, really,
equipped.
that's what the Book of Job is about.
It is. But in every generation, we have to be equipped to answer these questions, because there are young fledgling people out there who would come to Christ if these things were addressed, but they go unaddressed. Unfortunately, and there's stuff out there for them if they were genuine enough to actually seek it, but we have to be able to go and meet those people. So yeah, anyways, to your point, this stuff is sorely needed. And that's when I was on the campus, that's when my eyes really got open to how needed it was, is when I saw literally those barriers, those bulwarks of these questions going unanswered, literally like decided whether somebody came to Jesus or not. So it's a serious issue.
Yeah. Even with, me and a few of the youth went to like a Rethink Apologetics conference down in Dallas, I guess a year and a half ago. And it's one thing hearing things like me teaching it in a small group class, whatever, with some seniors and stuff in high school. But we got down there and they got to experience some of these other, like, just real big, like, great speakers, on defending the faith and everything. And basically every one of them was just like why aren't we taught this? Like, why don't we get this and stuff, whatever. And or why, basically why has it been brought up to us and stuff? And I'm like, man, it's just, like they recognize and they need it. And I don't know what the disconnect there is, if it's still one of those things where we just can't, like, where we just have a bad taste of what apologetics is, maybe, that it really is this argumentative, like you're just kind of a condescending jerk or something. I don't know, but
I think it's because of experience. Some people literally, and I know we've all probably talk to people like this, but there are some people who just ask questions and beg questions just for the sake of asking questions.
Yeah.
They're not genuinely interested in finding truth, and you can oftentimes identify those just by talking to them. And I think a lot of people who shy away from apologetics are people who have probably either been a part of or witnessed conversations with one or more of those kinds of people in the discussion, which I've seen plenty, and I know how awful and annoying that is, and how unproductive it seems. So I think that's what a lot of that is too.
Back to what you were talking about, with the problem of evil, I've always wondered, if these questions have always had, or if questions like the problem of evil have been answered back to the time of Augustine, like, why do we have to keep repeatedly answering them? Like, if the resources are out there, one, why aren't they seeking an answer to their question? And two, like, why do we have to keep repeating the same answer over and over? Like, we're using the words of Augustine, who lived what year?
In the 4th century.
Yeah. So, like, why are we having to use 4th century words in
I'll let you go ahead.
2010, whatever?
Well,
2020.
I mean, what do you think the average person knows about the 4th century?
I mean, not a lot, but I mean, if you have a question,
much of
why
church
would
history, because it's not taught.
Yeah.
So
Next
they
to
don't
nothing.
they don't know, and what they're taught in school just kind of skips over any of the intellectual tradition of the Middle Ages.
Mm-hmm.
That's the Dark Ages.
Yeah.
And then, with the Renaissance comes reason and science, and then the Enlightenment,
That rescues us from the dark
from
ages.
from the Dark Ages of superstition and backwardsness. So they just assume that it's not there or hasn't been answered. And if they go look it up, well, I mean, if they Google it, do you think that the first people that come up are some church that they're going to take seriously?
I don't know. Maybe it's just me being a very literal person. I would just Google, why is there evil in the world? I'm sure William Lane Craig has answered it thousands of times.
Yeah.
So surely there would be a very credible apologist that comes up in at least the first 5
Maybe,
Google
but they
responses.
may not trust that person
Yeah.
because
Maybe.
they're predisposed to thinking that people who are religious are superstitious, and like reason is not something that is engaged in with religion.
Yeah, and also, to be honest, I think you referenced the Book of Job earlier. Also, because in regards to like the problem of evil, for example, that's not an easy lesson to learn. Like the answer behind that is not always a satisfying answer to people. So, like you said, most people don't even know because they're not educated enough, or they don't have the self-motivation to like, hey, I'm going to dig into this and find out what the answers are. I'm going to see what people have genuinely written about this. They don't take it that far because it doesn't mean that much. And on top of that, when they do get to it, a lot of times they're not satisfied with the answer. And they move on.
And Dr. Craig specifies this a lot whenever the problem of evil comes up. And he says, there's 2 issues at hand here. There's the logical problem of evil, which has been solved for a long time. And then there's the emotional problem of evil, which is not going to be solved by apologetics.
And that's the side.
And that's the problem of like, it's a hard lesson to learn, and it doesn't just make them feel better to know the answer.
Right.
They need more of a pastoral care in that situation.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, no, that's the thing, because sometimes, well, basically people they're not on a truth quest, they're on a happiness quest. That's what it is.
Their truth, Charlie.
Yeah, their truth.
Justification quest. Maybe
Yeah,
even.
right.
They want their answer.
Just one more thought about that.
Yeah.
Also, the average person probably wouldn't Google this before they would just ask someone that they know that's a Christian. And so the success or failure of them learning about the answer to that question is going to largely depend on the Christian that they ask first.
Yeah.
If they don't know,
Yeah.
and they don't say anything other than, well, you just have to have faith or something like that.
That's a bad
Right,
taste.
that's not good.
And then
enough.
what makes more sense? That answer or a limp answer like that, or the atheist that they turn to who says, well, of course that's not true. Like, of course, why would there be, right?
Blame religion or something.
Yeah, it's very easy. And then point. So I mean, it's not a mystery at all why so many people have fallen into this trap. It's because we as Christians are not prepared to give a defense, as Peter tells us.
Well, I mean, like y'all were saying, like, that's a hard question to go through. Like, why do kids get cancer, stuff like that? That's a hard, mentally, that's hard to, that's a big hurdle.
I would say a mature question. You
Yeah.
know, it's like one of those things where we've talked a lot about amongst ourselves about like there being like, you know, meat of the word and milk of the word kind of thing. That's honestly one of those things that I think, even though we can have a very clear intellectual answer to through guys like Craig and Aquinas who break these things down beautifully. And Lewis, we haven't even mentioned Lewis, but the problem of pain is amazing.
Yeah.
I think ultimately this is a personal question more than it is an intellectual question or barrier. And to get past that personal level, you have to be kind of in the fold, I think, because that's just never going to make sense to somebody who doesn't understand the person of Jesus, who doesn't understand who God is. And so that's just one of those questions that I think like you can help get them in the door by removing the intellectual baggage, but ultimately like finding that fulfilling, satisfying answer to the emotional side of it won't happen until they're already in the room, so to speak, in the room of the faith. So I don't know, because that's a mature thing. I mean, that's what we can struggle with daily. I mean, I know this stuff, and it's still not easy for me to look at the kid with cancer, and nor should it be.
Right.
You know, like these are mature things, but unfortunately, this is the stuff that's often peddled, and I think very intentionally put as a bulwark around the faith. You know what I mean? Which that's sad, because like I said, that's a very mature issue, but one that we do have understanding of, I think.
Yeah. And along those lines, going to Lewis. You know, it was ultimately Lewis was like, you know, the world's unjust. You know, there's no justice in the world and stuff. And then at some point he's like, well, where do I get this idea of just and unjust from? Like, there has to be something that I have to measure this from. There has to be some sort of measurement for me to compare whether or not something is just or right or wrong and stuff. And so, which that was like I said, that was part of his conversion, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, so again, you have a Lewis, you have unbeliever and stuff, whatever. Really, these kind of arguments start to kind of move them in that direction. The other thing is you know, we as believers, if we understand and know our faith, like it's one thing to believe something to be true, but it's another thing to have a justified belief or warrant for your belief. And one of the things for me is like within my experience with apologetics was I actually got a copy of A Reason for God actually at the Chi Alpha House, and I want to say it was like Tim Tate had like left it there and everything. So that was my first experience with Reason for God by Keller, and I don't remember if it was actually in the book or if it was in a radio interview that Keller did with somebody, but at one point Keller has cancer. And as he's kind of, you know, really being faced with this like really life and death type of thing, and really starts to think about some stuff, he ends up reading some books. In particular, I think it was like N.T. Wright's on the resurrection. And Keller's like, at the end of it, he's like, you know, I believed Christianity to be true. I believed in the resurrection, but I didn't know how much more deep, like how deeper my faith could actually go by examining the evidence for the resurrection and for Christianity. And that caught me. I was like, what is that? Like, what else is there for that? And that's what really started pushing me into like finding out what is this evidence that he's talking about? Like, what is it talking about? Like the reasonableness of Christianity.
I think because there's and actually like Karp, who's very much my mentor in a lot of ways, actually this is kind of the verbiage that he uses, but essentially there's levels of faith, and I think the problem with the church like as a whole is that for the most part we're stuck on a level of faith that what he referred to as aspirational faith, and essentially it's just kind of self-defining. Most people are in the place where most outspoken Christians are in the place where they say, yes, I believe that, but what they really mean is I know I'm supposed to believe that. Like this is a mark of the faith. That's what I believe. But then there's another level up which becomes actualized faith. And I feel like that's the distinction that you were describing in what Keller was talking about. Like he's like, I've always said that I believe this, but maybe if he actually like completely unpacked himself, he would have found out that deep down there's probably deep down he probably didn't as much. But then upon evidence and upon seeing these things actualized in his life, that faith has a life of its own. Because not only is this something that you've read about and you've heard spoken about, but you've now seen it. You've now seen and experienced it. So I think that's what a lot of that is, and apologetics can help us with that. Because there's been, I don't know, me and you have talked about this a lot, but there are so many times when I'll hear an apologist explain something, and all of a sudden I'll just like hit it. I'm like, I felt like I've always known that.
Yeah.
I never knew how to say it until now, but I've always felt that. But if somebody would have ever pressed me on it, I wouldn't have been able to communicate that like that. And so that faith was at that moment, like before then, was just like that. I feel like this is right. I don't know how, I don't know why, but I can't really defend it. And then apologetics comes in or something like that, and like helps you bring it up to a new level where now it's like, no, this is an actualized faith that I actually have.
Yeah.
Let me explain to you why. And I think that's a really cool thing.
Mere Christianity. Sorry, Mere Christianity did that for me.
Yeah.
His whole first intro, he didn't even tie it back to Christianity, and it was just like the moral argument. That
Yeah, and he specifically is like, and notice, I haven't even said the Christian God or whatever. He's like, nor have I even called it God. I just said, made a case for this theism.
I mean, he has tons of metaphors that I'm just like, that's exactly what I had vaguely in my mind, and he just put it into words. I'm like, yeah, exactly.
So that Keller story really like resonates, I guess, with what I was telling earlier about myself, and kind of dovetails with what you were saying about the aspirational faith. Remember how I said that it wasn't like when I grew up in the church and it was like I was playing at this. But really the last domino to fall for me was the resurrection. And so, like I said, I'm not sure that I ever would have affirmed that I was an atheist, because it always seemed a little easier for me the idea that a God exists. But whether we were like projections in the mind of God, and it was basically like he was Shakespeare and we're Hamlet or something. It's a different thing when you get to the historical arguments around the resurrection.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, we just got done teaching a class on that.
Right.
So I guess it's come full circle. But that was really what the final linchpin that really hammered it in.
Yeah.
It was like, this is, as Lewis said, a myth that's true. It is not only is like a great story, it is the story, and it also happened in history.
Hey everybody, we hope you enjoyed the video so far. Be sure to tune in next time for the rest of it. Until then, find us on your favorite social media pages and on YouTube. Make sure you like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment down below. We'd love to hear from you guys. And until then, we bid you a very fond farewell.